I'm joined by Will Rollins, former federal prosecutor running for California's 41st congressional district as the Democratic candidate. Will, I got to ask you, there was this meeting yesterday that took place, or on Thursday, depending on when people are watching this, with the House Republicans, people like the Republican who currently holds the seat in California's 41st, Ken Calvert, inviting Donald Trump back to the crime scene, praising him as he talked about Hannibal Lecter and ranting and raving like a lunatic, a convicted felon who's just taunting the nation with his felonies. I mean, you're a former federal prosecutor. What do you make of all of this?
I mean, you got to appreciate the irony of it being our 250th anniversary as a country when we broke away from a monarch and a king. And the entire House Republican caucus has decided to bend the knee to a new wannabe dictator. 2026 is going to mark our 250th anniversary as a country. And I think the question for everybody watching this show and everybody in my congressional district is, what does America want to be? Who do we as Americans want to be? Because when the House Republican Conference abandons any spine, when you have people like Mitch McConnell, who Donald Trump has personally criticized his wife, same with Ted Cruz, same with all these other guys that have gone on after being debased by the former president to simply capitulate and bend the knee. It's a remarkable moment for the country. And I think so many Americans right now are craving people in office with the self-respect and the respect for our institutions and the rule of law and the recognition that this country is about more than one person, that we're going to end up flipping 20 to 30 House seats in November.
You know, the Republicans can never again say that they're the party of law and order. It's clear kind of chaos and disorder. And what's good to see, too, is that I think finally we're seeing some of the police unions kind of recognize that and go, wait a minute. There's a convicted felon right there, and that's not law and order. And for example, the Palm Springs Police Union, endorsed you, and I think we're seeing that trend across the country as well, with police unions as well starting to say, "Hey, look." Not only from a financial standpoint are Republicans trying to gut unions, which was always one of my confusions with the police unions. Like, you realize that the Republicans are literally trying to screw your wages. But I get like the rhetoric from the Republicans was law and order, law and order, law and order. That's what they used to say. But it's so clear now. And perhaps we thank Donald Trump for this mask off moment to realize who people like Ken Calvert were all along. I mean, Calvert's whole initial thing was like, let's just be real, like he was hypocritical. I mean, he frequented a prostitute and then he tried to cover it up. And then he wants to, which by the way, I have I'm not going to fault people for what they do in their private lives, but then he attacks, the same people that make it make sense to me, please.
Right. He wants the government and the police officers out of his car when he's caught with a sex worker, but he wants a massive government in your exam room if you're a woman, or in your bedroom if you're an LGBT person. I mean, this is kind of the irony again of this party and the hypocrisy of it, right? And I think most voters in my district don't want extreme right members of Congress who are going to defund the FBI, who've said that the FBI is infiltrated by rot. Most Americans want the FBI to be investigating bank robberies, violent crimes, drug cartels, terrorists. And most Americans don't want the far left claim that we should be defunding the police, And so the reason that I think we're going to win seats like California 41 is because we've got 90,000 independents who really just want normal people in the House of Representatives. And, when my opponent gets out there and votes for the continuing resolution that McCarthy put on the floor as one of his last acts as speaker, and votes to cut funding from federal law enforcement, and they burn our tax dollars on a weaponization committee designed to investigate a weaponized DOJ, which didn't prosecute Donald Trump for the felonies of which he was just convicted, and actually just convicted the president's son. I mean, it's a complete waste of taxpayer money, and most people want the rule of law. They respect jury verdicts. They respect the process. They know that one of our greatest assets as a democracy is the rule of law and the ability to get a fair trial in front of a jury of your peers.
One of the things we've built this network on is just an ode to normalcy. And I always like to say, yeah, you may characterize this as a political media network, but I really don't think it's political for me to comment when Donald Trump is out there having delusional conversations with Hannibal Lecter in his mind and talking about being eaten by sharks or electrocuted, or talking about how the January 6th insurrectionists, Donald Trump says, are the most horrifically treated people ever in American history, and that he changes the national anthem. He changes the national anthem to the J6th anthem. I just don't think it's even a political position for me to look at that and go, hey, that's a political disagreement. I just think that that's some weirdo kind of cult strange behavior that just needs to be called out. What that is cult behavior. That's not what the Republican Party used to be. And I don't know, when you're speaking to your constituents, because when I'm speaking to lots of Americans, I get people lots of independents, lots of Republicans are like, look, Ben, we just want normal people. And this new MAGA thing is like just weird.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking our slogan for a campaign might just be Team Normal. I mean, that's really where the bar has been set, unfortunately, by this House majority. And I also talk to voters and say, when we pledge allegiance to the United States of America. We don't pledge allegiance to one person. I mean, that's about as fundamental as it gets when it comes to meaning what it is to be an American, right? And that's why I bring up the 250th anniversary. You've got folks in the current House conference, and what I see and kind of find so remarkable about this moment that we're in is that Americans have egos. Americans have self-respect. Americans and politicians in particular were known for being, egotistical people. And I think what's crazy to me is that the House conference, these people lack ego. It is just a pledge to one man above all else. I mean, that's where their ego has become wrapped up. It's in how much can I debase myself to serve one person as opposed to my own constituents, right? Why is it good for the constituents in California's 41st to say that the FBI has been weaponized to cut funding from federal law enforcement, including, by the way, Border Patrol, when these guys are out there talking about wanting to secure the border? I mean, it's because they've got a leader who is dictating to them in a way that no American leader has ever been capable of doing in the past. And it's a really scary moment for all of us as Americans to be living through. But the good news is that, as you just said, so many more of us really just want normal people to roll up their sleeves and solve complex problems in government. That's the whole point of being in political office, trying to help make people's lives better and to compromise. And most of us just want a sense of humor again. We grew up in split families, Republicans and Democrats, but you still could shoot the shit and have a beer together at Thanksgiving. And I think most of us want to return to that.
Look, you're a former federal prosecutor. You handled very serious cases touching on counterterrorism. You have a great deal of respect for the rule of law. Like, just what goes through your mind? Because it certainly isn't funny at all when, to your point, when Donald Trump dresses up the MAGA Republican members of Congress who are supposed to be a co-equal branch, he puts outfits on them. Some are wearing ties with Donald Trump's face on it. The others are wearing the long red ties so they look like him. They show up at a criminal case where he later gets convicted. They stand out there and then they attack the judge's daughter and go after the jury. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the strange, I graduated law school in 2010. I went to Georgetown. I'm thinking about taking con law. I'm thinking about this, my admin law class with some great professors. I'm thinking about all these things. I'm thinking, what in the world is this? It's sad. It's strange. How would you describe it? Just with your background as a federal prosecutor to see this.
The one thing that I keep thinking about is the way that this kind of behavior affects regular criminal cases, because what a lot of us can relate to is being called for jury duty, right? And being asked to judge the credibility of witnesses and to judge the credibility of the prosecution's case every time you sit in that jury box, right? Not every case results in a conviction. There are juries that routinely acquit people, right? So I think when we have members of Congress that are out there saying that you cannot trust the FBI, that the system has been weaponized, and you've got a leading nominee of one of our two major political parties who has been more destructive for the rule of law and the criminal justice system and for federal law enforcement and prosecutors and now state law enforcement and prosecutors than anyone in our country's history, it has a ripple effect on every other case that is prosecuted and brought to trial across every jury that happens in the United States, right? And what I mean by that is think about getting called for jury duty and being asked to believe the testimony of an FBI agent when your local member of Congress, as Ken Calvert has done in California 41, tells you that the FBI has been infiltrated by rot. You know, these people are supposed to be leaders. You don't lead by following, and they've just consistently chosen to follow one guy. And, you know, the heads I win, tails you lose philosophy of our justice system and of every single aspect of policy and, you know, the outcome of elections is just fundamentally un-American. And it continues. The party of Reagan, the fact that the party of Reagan is doing this, and as somebody who worked for a Republican governor, you know, my first job out of college, Arnold Schwarzenegger, despite being a Democrat, I just cannot recognize the GOP that my grandparents belonged to. I cannot recognize the GOP that John McCain belonged to. And I think, you know, he certainly couldn't recognize it at the end of his career. And I always have thought to myself that Trump's candidacy would end when he teased John McCain for being captured serving in the US military during Vietnam. I said, there's no way that the Republican voters are going to stand by for this. And you know, he's continued to survive that. But I think the good news here is that he is losing voters. And we've seen this in their own primaries. I've seen it in my own district, being able to get the support of the former Assembly Republican leader in California, former Republican sheriff in Riverside County. There are people in the GOP that are regular voters that are ready for a normal option. And I think that Donald Trump is going to lose this November election because of that.
Yeah, that brings me to my final question. Look, you ran in 2022. It was a very close race. Calvert pulled ahead really towards the end by just 11,100 votes. You respected the results. You didn't say, find me 11,100 votes. What's changed in these past 2 years? And what are you seeing that is kind of different now? I think you just hinted at some of it, but what are you seeing now 2 years later that's different in the electorate that changes that gap?
The biggest thing is people are getting to know me. So, you know, the first time I ran, I had 6 months after my primary, and I went from a career in national security where the job is not to be self-promotional to suddenly having to get out there and make my name known to people. And I think by the time the last election rolled around, less than half of voters even knew who I was, and it was still a 4-point race. And the turnout in that midterm was low. It was about 240,000 people voting, but the projection in 2024 is 360,000 people voting in this congressional district. And that is a huge, huge difference for us. We also in the midterms had an 8-point gap in turnout between Republicans who voted at around 61% and 53% of registered Democrats voting. And I had people come up to me after the election and say, hey, I didn't even know you had a chance to beat Calvert until I saw them counting the ballots on CNN for a week after the election. And then I'd ask them, I'd be like, hey, did you vote? And they'd be like, nope. And I think, you know, fortunately this time, because we made it so competitive, people are really excited to finally get rid of 32 years of a guy who has made $20 million while in Congress. I mean, people are really, really excited to beat Calvert. And so the turnout, the name ID is better. We just had a poll that came back that shows us with a 1-point lead over Calvert, and which is a great place to be in May, which is when this poll was done of 2024. And I think that lead is only going to continue to grow as more and more people in this district get to know me and my name ID goes up.
Will Rollins running for California's 41st. You could get more information on Will Rollins at willrollinsforcongress.com. congresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscongresscon well. That's Will Rollins for Congress.com. Learn more about Will. Thanks for joining us as always.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 3 million subscribers thanks to your support. Have a wonderful day.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.